In this video, I'm going to go over the basics of how to get and use load data. Hey guys, Gavin here from ultimatereloader.com. When you go to load ammo, there's one thing that you are absolutely going to need, and that is reliable load data. What is load data? Well, if you see here, we have the components broken apart. We're going to have to pick a primer, and it has a particular size and an intensity. Example, small pistol primer versus large pistol primer. Standard versus Magnum. If you have a 357 Magnum, you're going to be using Magnum primers. If you have a 38 Special, you're going to use a standard strength primer. The primer sizes between rifle over here and pistol over there are essentially the same. So it's about size, which relates to diameter, and it's about Magnum versus non-Magnum. Then we have the shell casing. And this is essentially going to be, for a particular cartridge specification, a brand. Brands have different characteristics like internal volume, but there's a little bit less to think about. It's more of a question of quality and longevity. Then we have the powder. We're going to select a particular powder that has different characteristics like how it meters through a powder measure. And then we're also going to need a charge weight. The charge weight that you're going to start at and the charge weight that you're going to finish at, and that needs to be bound between the minimum and maximum loads specified by whatever source of load data you're referencing. And then we have the projectile itself. On the pistol side, this can be a simpler consideration. Is it going to be a round nose? Is it going to be a hollow point? And there might be some feeding implications there. There might be certain semi-auto pistols that don't like a certain style of hollow point, for instance, but it's more or less choose the weight and choose the profile, and there's a little bit less to it. With rifle bullets, you'll have considerations like, am I hunting with this? And what kind of ballistic coefficient do I have? What kind of consistency do I have? Wide variation of range and cost. Do I have a polymer tip? Is it a hollow point? Is it a lead point? So basically, you've got 4 different parameters that you need to think about. The primer, the shell casing, the powder, which is the type and the charge, and then the projectile. Now there are additional considerations like how deep are we going to seat the bullet. That's a little bit beyond the scope of this particular discussion. So when you sit down to load some ammo, or if you're sitting down to plan the ammo that you intend to load, in other words, I might need to go shopping, there are some specific considerations that you're going to want to walk through before you actually get to the loading manual, whether it be a physical book or an online resource like Hodgdon's Reloading Data Center. I start with the firearm type. So are we loading for a shotgun? Are we loading for a handgun? Are we loading for a rifle? Then we think about the application. So are we hunting? Are we plinking? Are we in a competition, right? All of those different factors. Another consideration around the firearm type is the age of the weapon. Is this a modern firearm that can handle full SAMI pressures, or is this a vintage firearm that we're going to need to take it easy with? Okay, so when we have the firearm type and the application sorted out, then we think about component availability. The first place to look is on your shelf. I had these powders here on my shelf. I have a whole shelving system for bullets. I have shell casings that are either previously fired or brand new, and so on and so forth. If you don't have components on your shelf that are going to work, then perhaps think about your local store. And if your local store doesn't have what you need, then think about online retailers and so on and so forth. You might find your local store's out of a particular powder and it's not easily available or readily available online. So that might steer you in a different direction. Fortunately, there are a lot of different powders, a lot of different bullets, a lot of different primers, so there's a lot of choices there. Then we think about special considerations, like do we want to consider a reduced load for a shooter that is recoil sensitive? Is this a subsonic load where we need to really precisely target 1,050 feet per second or 1,000 feet per second or whatever that specific velocity is? Are we looking for extreme precision? Are we going to be shooting at 800 yards and we've got a small target and we're really, considering and weighing the factor of wind, for instance. So we need a really flat shooting cartridge. There's a particular story that I like to share. I think it was 22 Nosler. I was shooting in a match. I had done my load development in probably 80-degree weather. It was 95-degree weather when I shot the match, and I had pressure problems. If you're going to go hunting in Alaska and it's going to be -30, you're going to think a little more carefully about, let's make sure that we have a large rifle primer for those cartridges where you can choose small primer versus large primer. I'm going to choose a powder that's a little bit less temperature sensitive. So there's a little bit more research to do, but once you've gone through this flow, you're in a good position to select your load data. So there are multiple places where you can go to get load data. You can go to your local reloading forum, which I would urge you to use with a grain of salt and use as one source of data that you're going to validate with an official OEM's source of load data. We could go to a book. This is the new Hornady reloading manual. And we've got pistol data, we've got rifle data, and this is mostly oriented around Hornady bullets. And yes, we can use that data with other bullets, but it's a great resource if we happen to be using Hornady bullets. Or we can go to an online source like Hodgdon's Reloading Data Center. If you go to hodgdon.com, you'll see something like this. I'm going to click on Reloading Data Center. And when we go here, we're going to go through a flow kind of like what I talked about with the arrows left to right. We are first going to pick the type of firearm. So let's pick rifle here. Okay, so the data is loaded. That takes a few seconds. We have 3 different sections here: standard, subsonic, and reduced recoil. So most of the rifle data will be in standard, but if you are shooting a cartridge like 300 Blackout, you're definitely going to want to check out subsonic so that you can get data that is optimized for that subsonic speed range. And you might go to standard and subsonic for a cartridge like 300 Blackout because you might want 2 different loads: a heavier load that's subsonic and a lighter load in terms of bullet weight that is supersonic. So the first thing we need to do is to pick the cartridge, right? So we could go with the 223 Remington example that we have right here. We go and pick a bullet weight. I think that bullet there is an 80.5, so we're going to pick 80 there. You can see our options filtering out here. And then we have different powder brands, right? So we have Accurate, Hodgdon, IMR, Ramshot, and Winchester. So if I want to go with something like CFE 223, we can select Hodgdon, select CFE 223 here, and then click on Get Load Data. So we have a result down here, and that's going to indicate which bullet we have, the bullet diameter, the case that was used for testing, and the primer. We also have the twist rate that was used, we have the barrel length that was used, and we have the trim length. Things like the barrel length are going to be important because that's going to give us a lens to view these velocities through. If we have a shorter barrel, we're likely to see lower velocities. If we have a longer barrel, we're likely to see greater velocity up to a point where you can extend the barrel, and because of the internal friction, the velocity will actually go down. But what Hodgdon tries to do is to use the barrel that is going to be kind of the standard for the cartridge. And so here we have a 24-inch barrel. If we were shooting this out of our 223 Trainer, which I believe has a 24-inch barrel, we would probably see velocities that are going to be real similar here. If we were shooting this out of an AR-15, we might expect to see slightly lower velocities for a given barrel length because of the gas system. So Hodgdon CFE 223, we've got a 2.380-inch cartridge overall length. And our starting load is 23.5 grains. We expect a velocity of 2,618 feet per second, and that's operating at a pressure of 43,400 psi. That would be the average pressure. If you look on a SAMI diagram, you're going to see maximum average pressure MAP, and that is just a measure for safety purposes and for ballistic calculation purposes. So we could go down to the starting load. We have to be careful if we go below that, and that's why Hodgdon has a separate section for reduced loads. In an extreme case, with an incomplete burn or inadequate powder charge, we could stick a bullet in the bore. And that's true for pistol and for rifle. So we have to be careful, and this is why we're coming here to an official manufacturer's source of load data, and we're very carefully selecting the data. We're very carefully applying that data. The maximum load shown here is 25.5, and we see a C there. That stands for compressed. So the powder column inside the case is going to get compressed slightly when the bullet is seated to its final seating depth. This is not a problem, but if you compress the load too much, you could have pressure problems, and you can also have bullet seating issues, like where the seating stem is pushing on the bullet, you could get a large dent. That's going to mess up your ballistic coefficient, and obviously is not something that you want. But compressing to a degree, if you're going with official data, is going to be a safe thing to do. We can actually buy that powder directly from Hodgdon, so that's an added convenience. We can print the load data, we can email the load data. So where do we start? So looking at our load, we have 25.5. What I'm going to do is type 25.5, and a good general rule is to start 10% below max if you want to be up there in your velocity, but not in the dangerous territory. So I'm going to go times 0.9, that's going to be 22.95. If I had printed this out, I would likely write an annotation on the sheet. I like to keep track of which loads I've tested, what kind of groups they've produced, and what kind of average velocity, standard deviation, and extreme spread I've observed with my chronograph. Standard deviation is kind of a statistical number that will rule out, kind of disregard the extreme cases of high and low and focus on what is the statistically significant variation. Extreme spread is just the highest velocity minus the lowest velocity. So it maps to the entire range of velocities, including those outliers. So as I'm shooting, I'll also keep track of group size. So usually I will annotate the targets, pull them off the target board and write all of that information on them and put them into a folder, not unlike this, right? So here I have my load data. I have the group size here, and this was a little bit less formal, so I don't have all of the data there. But I try and write down all of the data in the loading ledger that I'm using in the loading room and on the target, just so that when I go back to use the data, I have something to look at. So if we wanted to try a different powder via the Hodgdon website, we could just go up here, uncheck CFE 223, check Varget, hit the Get Load Data button, and then we've got that load down here. So you can see here that the starting load is going to be at 21.4, maximum load is going to be at 23.3. It's not compressed in this case, and so we could print that out, we could email it to ourselves, and so on and so forth. So let's take a look at a pistol example. I'm going to click on pistol up here at the top, and you can see we start at the cartridge section here. We're going to do 38 special with a 158 with Winchester powders. Let's say we have some auto comp that we want to use. Get load data. That returns 2 loads. We have a cast bullet, and we have a Hornady XTP hollow point. So for the cast bullet, we start at 4.8 grains and go up to 5.3 grains. With the XTP, we start at 4.5 grains, and the maximum load is 4.9 grains. You can see there's some meaningful differences here, and essentially we can go through the same exact process of taking the max load, multiplying it by 0.9, that gives us a good starting load, and then we can incrementally work up to whatever load is going to work best for us. So what are we looking at when we're working up loads? We're looking at velocity on the chronograph. Is the average velocity where we want it to be, right? For that subsonic load, it could be we want as high a subsonic load as we can load and not have it occasionally, transition over to transonic or supersonic. 1,000 feet per second is what we're looking for. If we're loading a 6.5 Creedmoor load, right, it's got 140 grain bullet, we're going to probably want to target around 1,700 feet per second, maybe 1,800 feet per second, depending again on the length of our barrel and other factors. So getting to the velocity that we want is one thing. Obviously with hunting, that is important because some bullets need a certain velocity to open up and you need a certain amount of energy, that kind of thing. We're also looking at group size. And this is where I will typically do this work at 100 yards for a rifle or maybe 25 yards for a handgun. We'll work up through the different charge weights and see how that's going to work. We can swap out a powder. That's why it's great to be able to do that really quickly and interactively here on the website. We can also swap projectiles. A heavier or a lighter projectile or a style of bullet or even a variation within a SKU. One of the examples that I use is I had A-tip bullets with Hornady for a 6.5 Creedmoor, I think it was. 153s weren't shooting well, so I went down to 135s. They did shoot well. So sometimes swapping out the projectile will give you better results. Sometimes you can swap out a muzzle device, going from a bare muzzle to a brake, or going from a brake to a suppressor, or any of those combinations. It'll inherently change your barrel tune, and that will essentially give you different results on target. These are just some of the steps and processes that I go through when I do load development, when I'm going to get load data. Go through the flow that I talked about at the beginning. Think about all of the different considerations and factors. Look at what you have on hand, look at what you could get at your local store, look at what you can get online, and that essentially is going to narrow down which components you're going to want to work with. You can also look for anecdotal information. Calzant over the Precision Rifle blog has a great series called What the Pros Use, and sometimes he gets into the load specifics there. It could be a great way to sort of fast track to a great load. You might have a local discussion forum. If it's a Wildcat cartridge, there might not be a lot of load data out there, so you might need to rely on friends. But always look for the official source of load data, and it's a really good idea to cross-reference data as well, just to make sure that you're in the right zone, as it were. So, I hope that this sort of quick start guide for getting and using load data has been helpful. If I missed something, please drop a comment and we can discuss that in the comments section. Thank you very much for watching. That concludes this video, and that means it's time to wrap it up. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you're watching Ultimate Reloader on TV and want to take advantage of free resources, exclusives, and hot deals, just hold your camera phone up to the QR code, tap on the link, fill out the information, boom, you're getting Ultimate Reloader emails. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Also, we're on Facebook, YouTube, Rumble, where we've got unrestricted content, and Instagram. Make sure to follow us on all those channels. Ultimate Reloader also has a commercial solutions division serving law enforcement, the military, and the gun industry. We have some unique capabilities, including a comprehensive suite of recoil testing and evaluation capabilities, trigger profiling, and more. Thanks again for watching.